Hello everyone, my name is Tom Dodge, and I'd love to welcome you to Creating the World We Want, a video podcast aimed at articulating, analyzing, and building movements towards the future we want together. I'm here with my co-host Bob Massey, and we're honored to welcome Jennifer Erickson, who is the founder and director of the Arts and Cultural Department at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. The MAPC is a key player in the regional development of 101 cities and towns in the greater Boston area. Jennifer is also an artist herself with a ceramics portfolio, and today we're going to dive into a deeper discussion on how artists and urban planning can contribute to creating the world we want. Bob?
Jennifer, thank you so much for coming. I come from a family of artists. I've been in politics for a long time. I'm a person who believes deeply that in order to build the world we want, we have to think about it in advance and really tap our creative energy and our values. So I was very impressed with your background and the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And we'd like to start with just hearing about how you became you. What was it in your childhood that built this interest that has resulted in such an extraordinary combination of interests and gifts?
Sure, thanks for the invitation to be on your podcast show. So I can tell you a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. So I'm a Boston native, born and raised. I grew up in Allston. My parents were immigrants. I was not from China. I was not the first in my family to go to college. I was the third in my family to go to college. But art has always been a part of my life. So I remember from a very early age, growing up in the inner city, I didn't do a lot of extracurricular stuff when I was younger. So I would spend a lot of time just kind of like observing and drawing the world around me. And it was actually through a public art project in my neighborhood that really got me thinking about issues of place and civic space in the public realm and arts and culture. I got involved right after college with a public art project in my neighborhood that was organized by my local community development corporation.
Well, what was it? What kind of project was it?
Sure, it was a project. It was through what was called the Art and Community Landscapes funding program at the New England Foundation for the Arts. And they made grants to install public art in places around, I think, New England, or maybe it was only a Boston-focused program. So I was a resident advisor on the selection committee to select a team of artists that installed some public art in my neighborhood. And the person who was facilitating that process for the CDC came from an urban planning background. And so the connections just started to be made for me around, wow, there is this way of thinking about systems in community that also engages arts and culture and creativity. And that really sort of sparked my interest.
And just that particular project, were you painting walls or were you?
No, I was not.
No, I mean
Yeah.
the project itself. How would you describe it visually?
I would describe it now as kind of like a wayfinding marker installation. So we hired an artist team that did, I think it was cast in, it may have been bronze or some type of metal. So if you go there, it's still there. It's
Cool.
in Allston, right when you get off the Mass Pike and
Yes.
you're driving over the Cambridge Street Bridge, you'll see it. It's sort of sticking up. So that was my early interaction at the intersection of arts, public realm, and urban planning. But yeah, I am a practicing artist. So in addition to being an urban planner, I work with the earth. I literally work with the earth, with clay, and I make functional work, mostly functional work and some sculptural. So it's important for me to have both a continued regular creative practice that feeds my soul and is a personal practice, and then there's my arts and cultural planning work, which is my public practice.
Well, I live in Somerville. I've been there since the 80s, and we have seen that city be transformed by all different kinds of public art, whether it is things like Porch Fest and practices where people are invited to come out of their homes, or open studios where you can go into their homes, or incredible murals. There's one right along Mystic Avenue that gets bigger every year, and it's about 5 or 6 feet high. And as you're driving on a fairly grody avenue right next to the highway, you suddenly see all of these paintings of what the Mystic River is like, or could be like, all of the flora and fauna and people enjoying it. So it's just one of those invigorating reminders to think about something other than the concrete right in front of you or whatever is bothering you that day. So, but tell me, it must have been challenging to build a career around this, and then to go into a more perhaps conventional planning organization like MAPC and make the case for this. So tell us about that, and maybe offer any tips to people who have that same longing to persuade an institution that this is really valuable, goes to the heart of who we are and who we want to become.
Sure. I should say that after that formative experience with that public art project, at the time I was working in philanthropy for grant makers that were making investments around improving life in the Commonwealth. And I felt like what was missing, some philanthropy can be very strategic, but what I thought was interesting was that government is really in this position of making communities work, making life work for people, right?
What should be doing.
So when I went into planning school, I'm reaching back to planning school before I talk about NIPC because I think this is important.
We want to hear about that.
When I was in planning school, there was no curriculum in my program that had anything to do with arts and culture. There was urban design course offered, but I focused on taking the classes that I felt like would give me exposure to policy and social justice, because those are all things I also really care about. So even though I didn't see arts and culture in my planning curriculum and program, I didn't really give up on the idea. I still was really intrigued by this idea of like imagination and possibility. And I think that's what artists and arts and culture create space for, imagination and possibility. So even though I didn't see that in my planning program, I thought, I'm going to stick this out. I'm enrolled. I want to finish. I want to do this thing. I think it's important to be grounded in other content areas, even if you're an artist. So when I landed at MAPC through an internship.
Was that right as?
That was while I was in planning school. So I worked in government affairs, and I also worked in the communications department before I entered into the land use department. So I sort of worked my way through the agency, and during that time I got to know the culture of our work. So urban planning is a very multidisciplinary practice, right? Transportation, housing, economic development, public health, climate, energy. So we do a lot of different things, and it takes a while to understand all the different pieces of the practice. So I really spent my first several years getting the lay of the land, learning how to be a generalist planner. And luckily, our regional plan, Metro Future, has about 60 goals and lots of objectives attached to it. There was language in there around cultural vitality and arts and culture. And so there was some precedence for creating some work to support that aspect of the regional plan. So that's really what I grabbed onto to say, there has been some public process that precedes me that identifies the importance of arts and culture to community life. So that really became the thing that helped organize other people around the issue in creating space for arts and culture and planning.
So you really took something, you had a precedent, but at the same time you created something out of nothing to a degree, like you created this whole new department that's now officially a department. What were the steps you used to kind of build that movement, to bring that to life to what it is today?
Sure. It was nothing short of organizing. So when you introduce something new into the culture of a place, you're both organizing from the inside and organizing on the outside. So as an agency that serves 101 cities and towns, at the time we had about 40 staff. We're now a staff of close to 100. Cool. And we were lean. We were lean for serving such a large region. So one of the things that's important about how we work is we fundraise and we raise money through grants to supplement the work we get from various state sources and from cities and towns through our assessment. So because we're able to fundraise to meet and advance our mission as a regional agency, it actually creates space for innovation. So early on, I would pitch these little ideas of engaging arts and culture in various planning projects, which our executive director had a fund to allow staff to explore innovative ideas. That's also very visionary of him. So it'd be like, $2,500, $5,000, a little bit of money here and there. And then the project that really launched the practice was when I was staffing the inner core subregion at the time that engages 21 of the innermost communities in our region. pitched the idea of doing this arts and
That's
planning
called the
toolkit.
inner core.
Right, the
Yeah.
inner core. So that serves about 21 communities out of our 101. And that's a learning space for planners to meet monthly around issues that they want to learn more about. So Arts and Culture has proposed this idea of doing a toolkit, unpacking all the ways in which arts, culture, and creativity can add vibrancy into planning community development practice. So expanding people's imagination around what's possible, not just arts and economic development, right?
Could you tell us the web link for that toolkit? We'll
Sure.
put it right, because I think
It's-
people are hungry for like, how can we do this?
Sure, it's artsandplanning.org. So we purchased a very basic URL because we wanted this thing to have life, beyond just MEPC's region. So through partnership and collaboration with folks who were working at the state at the time, we're still at the state, they endorsed us to really launch this as a statewide resource. So you'll see if you go to the site, it says a resource for Massachusetts cities and towns. But it also brings together inspiring case studies from around the country, so it's not just Massachusetts focused. Most of the case studies are actually from other places. And we're adding content every month. So there are case studies, there's links to existing resources that are out there, but we do a little bit of translating so that planning and community development folks can have some context for understanding the content. And we're continuing to add to it. So as we finish projects in our agency, we write about the best practices that are emerging from some of that work. So the toolkit is constantly growing.
So where did it go after the toolkit into becoming the department?
Sure. So at the time, after the toolkit was adopted, we have this call for assistance that we release to communities twice a year to come to us, let us know what we can help you with. So through that call, one community, Arlington, asked us if they wanted to do approached us about doing some cultural planning work. So our agency actually funded it through our existing resources. I believe it was through our Planning for Metro Future technical assistance, which is basically the re-granting of our assessment dollars. We funded that with agency funding, and we got that work off the ground. Around the same time, a funder heard about our toolkit project, saw that we were really serious about investing staff resources to do cultural planning work, and they invited us to submit a multi-year grant proposal to really give the toolkit legs to help cities and towns in Metro Boston implement some of the strategies that are in the toolkit. So that happened in 2016. And then by January of 2017, we received the grant, and that enabled us to hire some of our first staff. So now we have a team of cultural planners and artists on staff that are doing cultural planning work, creative placemaking work, what I would broadly consider creative community development work. I really see the arts and cultural services we provide as helping government staff, specifically planning staff, innovate how they approach their community development responsibilities.
Having run for office, I know there's a deep longing to bring these kind of creative activities and projects and visible commitments to a creative and imaginative world. That's all over the state. But I have encountered a lot of frustration that government and our legislature and our administration don't seem to believe or commit the resources at the level that would be important to really moving this forward. So I think we would like to understand, our viewers would like to understand this ecosystem. So how can we help the legislature, and if necessary, push the legislature and the administration move forward? How are you doing that? Who are the key players? I know there's a wonderful organization called Mass Creative where artists themselves are presenting the case. Help us understand the world in which you are trying to make change more broadly as you interact with government.
Sure. So one thing to note is that, with our Arts and Culture Department at a regional planning agency, we have now burst onto the scene as, another state agency that is supporting arts and culture. But I think the value add of us to the advocacy conversation is unique because we work in a very interdisciplinary way. Our relationships with the legislature really are around cross-cutting issues: housing, transportation, economic development, public health, climate. So when we introduce arts and culture into the mix, we do very much want to talk about the value of arts and culture to various dimensions of community health and vitality. So it's arts and culture and. So that is the value add that we bring. We also, as a policy and data-driven agency, We are able to contribute data and maps that can help bring some of that knowledge around the impact of arts and culture down to a very local level. So we can produce resources at the city and town level that can help with advocacy efforts of Mass Creative. We also are interested in addition to policy change at the state level with more sustained funding for arts and culture and creativity, we're also interested in policy change at the local level, at the city and town level. So
What would that look like?
what that looks like is, how can cities and towns streamline permitting to make it easier for dynamic public art to happen, to transform the public realm? It looks like how cities and towns think about local funding sources through various taxes that can be allocated, for example, from parking benefit districts or from the marijuana tax. There are various creative ways cities and towns can think about raising resources for arts and culture locally that can match any change or new sources and funding that come at the state level.
Is there some place in the country that's just doing an incredible job, and if we could snap our fingers and bring their practices to us, you'd be thrilled? Or are we right at the forefront trying to cut a new pathway?
Sure, there are other states that have done some great work. Seattle, we recently organized a learning trip to Seattle, bringing a delegation of legislators and city and town staff to learn from the work of King County and the city of Seattle. They have much more funding and staffing at both the county and city level that supports arts and culture. And it would be wonderful to see that investment and that type of coordination between the city, town, and regional levels in Massachusetts. So there's more.
So it's important to have all three connected.
Right. City, town, regional, state.
So in order to ensure that we build together, is there any strategies or lack of strategies you've seen where communities have been left behind in this creative urban planning process or regional planning process where we haven't done as good of a job getting all the stakeholders to the table? Or have you had experience, you have in bringing a lot of communities together, but do you have some best practices to make sure everyone's voice is heard in these bigger building projects?
Yeah, I think I will unpack that question a little bit. So one thing I would point out is that the level at which we work. So my team, working at the regional level, works also at the city and town level and at the neighborhood level. We also take on research projects that help to transform conversations that are happening regionally through data and policy research. I will say that there are two types of change we want to make, and then I will talk about the impact we hope it has on people. Cool. One is we are trying to do work that helps create the policy and planning conditions that can help arts and culture thrive. How can, through our work, we change how cities and towns think about permitting, think about zoning, mixed use, that creates more opportunities for arts and cultural development or adaptive reuse. We are also trying to create, by existing at a regional planning agency, trying to demonstrate the value of arts, culture, and creativity as being valued alongside any other established planning practice, and how that can also transform and invigorate how we implement various planning initiatives. So what does it look like to engage artists and creativity into a conversation around inclusionary zoning? What does it look like to engage creativity into climate resilience planning? How do we think about social and cultural resilience? So through all of our work, we are trying to instigate transformative conversations and transformative connections. So the hope is we're not only making conditions better for the arts and cultural sector, we're also inviting people to reimagine how they can bring more creativity into how they do their planning and community development work, even if they're not artists. So,
are there any data points that aren't discussed enough that people will be surprised on how creative projects can impact the community?
I don't have all the data points at the top of my head, but we do have a new section on our toolkit that we're rolling out that it's around creative economy data. So we're pulling from recently collected state-level data from other organizations like the Massachusetts Arts Leaders Coalition. Americans for the Arts also recently did an arts and economic prosperity study in Massachusetts. We're pulling in some of that data. And then we're also referencing some national data. Cool. So that will be a go-to resource for folks who want some quick talking points about the impact of arts and culture on community life and economic development.
Awesome. We'll make sure to share that out there with the community to make sure that any artists out there looking to have this data in terms of their practices, it's available and easy to access.